Hi, I'm Xannie Vest, and welcome to my older adult oral video presentation. I have chosen to focus on Erickson's stage 7, generativity versus stagnation, which we probably all know by now that is in middle adulthood. It comes around the years of age 40 to 65, and it's a time when individuals really focus on their work, their families, their community, and they begin to think about future generations. People in middle adulthood become less self-focused and more focused on the well-beings of people and the communities around them. And adults who are unable to do this become self-absorbed, stagnated, and unable to be productive for the sake of others. Erickson's traditional notion of generativity for women really focused on procreation and the establishment of the next generation. And I point that out because I will later discuss revisions to that notion and how they apply to generativity in general and to my interviewee in particular. My interviewee I will call Mary, and she is someone I met about 17 years ago when I moved to my current state of Delaware. We were introduced by my aunt and uncle, who were good friends of hers, and my then husband and I both really didn't know anybody here. And Mary really took us under her wing and introduced us to a lot of people and helped us get settled into the community. And I chose her as my subject because I have, since meeting her, really admired her community involvement, and particularly in the past several years, I've admired her political activism. Mary is soon to be 76, and in her middle adulthood, I'll actually point to a time really about the age of 46, which was when she had been married for about 23 years, and she had 3 children who were 13, 16, and 18. She describes herself as a stay-at-home mother and a community volunteer, and she repeatedly said that at that point in her life, and really her entire life leading up to that, was an easy, happy life. And she did say several times during our conversation, I was so happy. So it was a very big shock to her when her primary challenge came to her in middle age, when her husband asked her for a divorce. She was, as I said, completely shocked and blindsided, and it turned out that he had had several affairs. She had been completely unaware. And she said that she was in shock for quite some time and filled with anger, and that her immediate focus was keeping her current lifestyle and her current social structure. And after her divorce was settled, because she had been married to a man who was a very prominent, successful attorney, she made out very well in the settlement financially, and she was in a very strong position financially. So economically, I'd say she accomplished her goal of keeping her lifestyle. But what was harder for her was her social structure. She felt that people inevitably chose a side, and she did feel a stigma of being a single middle-aged woman, which I think a lot of middle-aged divorced women feel. And she said that she struggled to reestablish herself in her community. I just have to say I've been having a lot of trouble recording this, so I'm going to keep looking at my time to make sure that I am continuing to record, so I apologize with my eyes bouncing all over the place. Fairly soon after her divorce, her 3 children were out of the house. She had 2 of them went away to school at boarding school, and 1 was in college. And as I described before, she had really previously achieved the traditional definition of generativity through the birth and raising of her 3 children. She said that after everyone was out of the house, she had about a year of complete self-focus. And her psychosocial crisis was that she could have stayed self-absorbed from that point on and could have remained in stagnation throughout her life. But as she started to settle into her new life, she began to devote much more of her time and free work to volunteer work. And it started extending beyond impacting her immediate community. Previously, most of her volunteer work had been around her children's schools, and her volunteer work took on a much larger reach. One of the articles that I'll point to that was very interesting for me and how it applied to Mary was from the Sociology Compass called Redefining Generativity Through Life Course and Pragmatic Lenses. And I thought that the article applied to Mary by explaining how the term generativity has evolved over time from its original definition by Erikson. And the authors indicate that the term is no longer limited to middle adulthood. And I do see Mary's generativity lasting now well into her later life. Like I said, she's currently 76, and she is still very much in a generativity stage, even though she's in a later life stage as well. The authors of the article also look to expand on the traditional notion of procreation and the establishment of the next generation. And they have a revised view of generativity, including it spanning multiple developmental stages and being a lifelong endeavor and not one which is motivated by one's own looming mortality. It also includes a wide variety of definitions, according to this article, falling under an arching umbrella of contributing to a wider community and beneficial to a greater humankind. And the authors propose that generativity should be characterized by growth rather than an attempt to remedy the fading self. In terms of biopsychosocial factors in Mary's life, it really seemed that everything worked in her favor. She might not have been aware of it at the time, but in retrospect, she very much is. Mary is a white, upper middle class Christian woman. She received a higher education, and she was physically healthy. And she talks about the only stigma she remembers feeling was in terms of her gender and of being a divorced female. And she felt that because her husband had so much perceived power due to his job and financial position, she felt that people really sided with him and that she lost friends and friendships of individuals and couples. And I don't think she really feels that way in retrospect, but it seemed that way to her at the time. Once she was getting settled, friends really encouraged her to get a job, which was not something that I pointed out she needed financially. And she actually said, I didn't want to lower myself. It wasn't a place where she saw herself at that point in her social standing. And she admits quite readily that she did not have the maturity at the time to take a job. She says that developmentally it was absolutely a regret for her. And she thinks she would have felt better about herself and that also she would have met different people and increased her social circles. She was offered a job as the development director of the Arthritis Foundation. And honestly, Mary is such an intelligent woman and curious and easy to talk to, and I think she probably could have gotten any number of jobs she applied for had that been the route she wanted to take. So there was another article which really worked well for me in Mary's case from the Canadian Sociological Association called Wanting to be Remembered, Intrinsically Rewarding Work and Generativity in Early Midlife. And the findings in this article repeat previous findings that generativity is found through civic engagement. And Mary certainly became more involved in volunteer work than she had been prior to her divorce. She served on many boards, which was something she could do because of her financial position, but she really absolutely was a hands-on volunteer and still is a hands-on volunteer with her time and energy. So she absolutely increased her civic engagements after her divorce. But back to the article, the authors do conclude a strong association between an individual's feelings of generativity and intrinsically rewarding work. And in describing intrinsically rewarding work, the authors look at employment that is considered to be a vocation rather than a career. They consider a person with a career to be motivated by her own success, whereas in a vocation, they say a person finds meaning in and motivation by a desire to help others. And at first, I really didn't understand Mary's comment that she should have gone back to work because from my viewpoint, she has had such a full and productive and generous life. But this article really did help me to see it a little more clearly from where Mary was coming, that I think she would have had a greater sense of generativity had she gone ahead and taken a job rather than volunteer work post-divorce. In terms of other biopsychosocial factors, there was no oppression in her case. She is not someone who suffers in her world from any diversity or difference. And Mary is absolutely keenly aware of her privilege. She is a very privileged person, and she absolutely knows that. One of the primary reasons that I chose to interview her was because I admire that she has really not seemed to slow down in her older age. And not only is she still quite physically active, but I know her to be extremely civic-minded and politically involved still, as I've mentioned. And because I know she's an active leader in our Indivisible group, I asked her about when she first became politically involved. And she said that it was after 9/11 and after the U.S. had gone to war in Iraq. And her children encouraged her to attend a protest in New York in the winter of 2003. So she ended up at the protest by herself. She never caught up with her children who were living there at the time. And she admits, with some humor and some horror, that she was wearing a fur coat to the protest. And she does see the irony in that now. I would not be surprised if somewhere in a closet or who knows where in the back of her house she still has the coat. I'd be really surprised if she wore it today. And I feel very confident saying Mary would never show up at a protest in 2021 wearing it. And she does go. I know she goes to protests and participates in marches and peaceful protests. By applying a multi-systems lens, I certainly believe that biopsychosocial factors were gigantic in helping her resolve her crisis. She absolutely had the support of family and friends, and the economic factors for her were absolutely a part of her resolution. And it does seem to me that very few women have been in her shoes of not having to worry about finances post-divorce. And I honestly think that by eliminating that all-encompassing stress was one of, if not possibly the biggest factor in how her life played out. But she really did also have strong ties to her family and their emotional support, and she absolutely